Okay, cool. So today we're going to be discussing epistemology and perception in specific. So what is epistemology? We will find out in a minute, but first let us do our icebreakers for today. What is the weirdest dream or hallucination you've had? Does anyone want to go first? This is like inspired by like Mari's conversation on like last weekend or something.
Oh, nice.
But yeah, any weirdest dreams or hallucinations?
I guess like even dream journal recently.
Oh yeah.
And that's been fun. But one that's come up that was really weird. It's like me and my brothers were driving through a national park, but like all the trees were like dead. And there's like a small town in the middle of this national park. And essentially, we just like rampaged town, like drove the car through like every store, every shop. Like they were like live theater performances, and we just drove through. It was actually kind of fun, but also like pretty wild. And then we finally found some trees that were alive. They were being guarded by lions. So we fight the
Wow.
lions, and then I woke up.
Interesting. Do you think there's any symbolism there?
There's probably a lot. Much to think about.
Okay, next. Milo?
Just like
I do not know what should.
Uh-huh.
Weird dreams I've had. The ones I usually remember are like the back, where I'm chased by a serial killer or something. Those aren't necessarily weird, but strange. Hallucinations, I haven't.
Interesting. Mari?
Was this inspired by that conversation about being afraid to piss yourself?
No, I don't, not that one specifically, but like the conversation that was related to that.
I was saying that this was a dream where my friends and I were like on the beach, and then it's like we saw this guy walking a dog on the beach, except like he kept disappearing. But he was like, bro, I can't even. Okay, so and then like this random like hooded figure was coming towards us, and it was like it looked like a cyclops, and it was just wild. I don't even know how to explain it. And then I remember like feeling like I was just melting into the floor, you know, crazy stuff, crazy dreams, you know.
Yeah, that's pretty trippy, Nathan.
I've had some really weird dreams. I can't recall any though. One the dream that I had yesterday though was that I slept through my alarm and it caused me to wake up on time.
Oh, that's useful.
Do you ever get dreams that like you get up and you get ready for the day?
That never happens to me, but I do have like the alarm kind of thing where I dream that I woke up, but like I just like I never go through the entire morning routine. That would be kind of crazy.
A lot of my dreams are like they're not even like normal day events with something off. They're just completely normal days that could totally happen.
Yeah. Interesting.
I honestly don't know.
Sid?
I had a dream once that like I just woke up and I was just like speeding on a highway. I don't drive. It was terrifying. I was like, holy shit, I'm gonna die. And then I died.
Oh, that's kind of sad.
I'm so scared.
Yeah, I also had a dream once when I was a kid that I was like driving this huge kind of like pickup truck thing, but I like didn't know. I was like 12 or something, but I very clear I remember that dream
I
a lot.
was so scared.
Yeah. Okay, Yashika?
When I first moved to Pittsburgh, I had like learned to drive maybe like a month ago, and so I kept having these dreams where I'd be driving and I would try to press the brakes, but I would press the race instead.
Oh,
I would
shit.
press the race, but it would be the brakes. And like I would turn this, like the
accelerator?
Accelerator, yeah. Or I would like I would turn the steering wheel left and it would go right, and it was just like a mind fuck. Yeah.
That is pretty spooky. There's definitely a lot of symbolism there, I could imagine, right? Like pressing the wrong pedals or I don't know.
I think I was just scared that I lost my ability to drive.
Okay.
Mine took place in Brazil for some reason.
Oh wow.
We were on like, which I don't know if Brazil has beaches, but the location was called Brazil. Actually, it was a small island. So it was me and a bunch of people. I don't remember. It might have been family members, might have been friends. And for some reason, So I'm like invisible now and like moving around and I don't have to like walk or anything. I'm just like floating. I'm trying to get everyone's attention, but they don't see me or hear me. I'm like yelling at them and they don't perceive me at all. And then I panic.
Should we wait for Chris, or I guess I can go and then we'll see whether he shows up.
He just went to the bathroom.
Okay. For me, I think not a dream, but like a weird perceptual hallucination I had once while on a certain substance was the starting of this Pink Floyd song, Comfortably Numb. There's like this first it starts with like all these like noises I'll play the song at the end of class or something, but it's like you were in a crowded room or something, blah blah blah, blah, and then it goes like quiet, and then there's like a and like when this part played, like I literally feel that I was like lifting out of my body, like this like a very perceptual hallucination, I guess, not like a visual one, but like I sort of like the sound literally made me feel like I was like rising. So yeah, kind of intriguing. Okay, cool.
Yeah, I remember the hallucination I think I was talking about.
Oh yeah.
When I was a kid, like I think I remembered more about it. My parents would always talk about like how dangerous the outlets were, and I think they like primed me to like, because they described it in like metaphors the way like these I guess Asian parents do. And they were like, it's like a dragon or a tiger coming out of the outlet, and I literally saw like a Chinese style like tiger, dragon, whatever come out of the outlets. And then like recently I saw someone's like, this is a smaller, doesn't matter, but it was like this girl's headband. It was, I swear it was like royal or like purple. Like, but then I looked back at it and it was looking orange, and I was like, what is going on?
Strange. Yeah, no, there's a lot of that kind of stuff. Like I'm in cognitive psychology right now. Like we're talking about like all that kind of stuff a lot, like perceptual errors, and we'll talk about that today, definitely. So, okay, cool. So now we're jumping into the era of classical Indian philosophy. So when we say classical Indian philosophy, this refers to like sort of a specific period, a specific mode of thought. So we've spent the last few weeks talking about a lot of other sort of things that we might refer to as philosophy, right? We've talked about literature, we've talked about like early Indian like religious ideas and metaphysical ideas. But when we talk about classical Indian philosophy, we're really referring to the specific era that is generally considered to go from like the last few centuries BC up till about 1200 AD. And the reason we call this the classical era is because it was a time during which ideas became highly systematized and formalized. And we also start seeing the rise of these very formal logical discourses. So rather than having people just sort of like preaching metaphysical views, we have people actively defending and constructing rational arguments to the truth, like to show one side is true and one side is false, etc. And during this period, we see the rise of a number of schools of thought, which are called darshans in Sanskrit. So there's 6 Astika schools. Astika literally means there is, and it refers to the fact that these 6 Astika schools believed in the epistemic authority of the Vedas. So they were basically the orthodox schools in Indian philosophy, where they were more in line with the traditional kind of viewpoint that the Vedas, which have come down since at least 1500 BC, that they were epistemically infallible. Then there's the 3 Gnostica schools. These Gnostica schools were sort of intellectual rebels. They basically said that the Vedas aren't necessarily aren't true, and we have our own sort of sources of truth. And those are Buddhism, Jainism, and Charvaka. So the Buddhists and Jains, like I guess you guys are kind of familiar, the Buddhists care a lot about this idea of nirvana. The Jains are really obsessed with ahimsa, which is like non-violence. The Charvakins are much less well known. They died out about 1,000 years ago, and they were basically these epistemological skeptics. So they were very skeptical of the idea that we could gain knowledge from performing logical inference. Then in terms of the 6 Astika schools, we sort of have an overview over here. So we have the Sankhya school, which is really into this idea of dualism between like Purusha and like Prakriti. So like this diagram doesn't really tell you much, but I guess like the idea is that there's like a metaphysical, like kind of perceiving spirit. And then there's like the material world with all of its thoughts and objects and everything. So they care about that. Then there's yoga. Yoga is often referred to as just Sankhya with a personal god called Ishvara. And then you have the Vaisheshika school, which developed the theory of atomism around like 600 BC. So really early on, even before what's the dude in Greece called Diogenes, right? Yeah, so he developed his own account of atomism a few hundred years after that. And then we have the Nyaya school, which focused heavily on logic. They developed this highly sophisticated logical language around 1100 AD that had like highly specific terms and syntactic structures that were specialized for constructing logical arguments and discourses. And then there's the Mimamsa school, which was heavily focused on the ritualistic portion of the Vedas and emphasized ritual action, and was actually almost atheist in a lot of ways, in the sense that they didn't believe that the words that referred to gods in the Vedas actually referred to any existent real entities in the material world, but rather were just linguistic constructs. And what the Vedas really served to do was not to praise any gods or anything, but rather to cause humans to perform these actions. And then there's the Vedanta school, which now dominates most of Hinduism. Most people, when they say Hindu philosophy, they're referring to Vedanta. And Vedanta cares a lot about Brahman, which is like the consciousness universe whole. And the Vedantins care a lot about this idea of moksha, that we're sort of trapped in our material bodies, and sort of the purpose of life is to escape and become one with this cosmic universal consciousness. Any questions on this? This is just sort of like a preface to where we're going for these next 6 weeks. Yeah.
With the atheist sort of school, did that apply to like the
Yeah, the Mimamsa, yeah, they were atheist. The Charvakins are also definitely atheist. The Buddhists and Jains the Buddhists are probably atheist, like most ways you think about it. And the Jains are also sort of like that. The Sankhya is also sort of atheist. Actually, yeah, the Sankhya is like pretty clearly atheist. So yeah, definitely a lot of like having the existence of a creator god really isn't that big of a contention point in Indian philosophy. 2 of the 4 orthodox schools are in fact atheist by most standards. Cool. Any other questions here? Okay. So the first question I'm going to ask, bruh, okay. How do we know something is true? How do we know something is true? If I say this marker cap is green, how do you know it's true?
We don't, because the concept of green, like I think it was like some of the ancient societies naming words distinguishing like greens and blues, and so like I think my parents would call that like ching, which is like it's like kind of like yellow green, so it's like not green to them, you know. So it's true to like me and true to us, but like it's not a universal truth because color is like relative.
That's an interesting perspective. It's not a universal truth. Okay, Chris.
Yeah, I think we can go further and say that we can't even know that thing. Like we can definitely fall into the solipsism and like not know anyone else's view besides us, even me. But like eventually we have to set some sort of threshold to like engage in society like at all, because if we're just like in our minds all the time, then nothing gets done. So we have to like, so for us, truth can just like oh, if it just passes like a reasonable amount of like guidance or like justification that to us, we can take it as true.
So that's sort of like a pragmatic viewpoint. Like in order to deal with society, we have to accept certain things as true. Cool. Milo?
I again don't have a basis in philosophy, very interested in background, but like if you ask me, I would say I believe is green, it seems to be a common consensus. I feel like if you ask majority of English speakers, the vast overwhelming majority would agree that this is the green marker, right? And that makes it, at least to us, sure.
Yeah, so that's sort of also like a pragmatic kind of approach, I guess, right? That everyone sort of agrees it's green, therefore we should treat it as green. But then like I can bring up the question of like in 500 BC or like 500 AD or whatever, people used to think the sun went around the earth, right? And if you asked everyone, they would say, yeah, the sun goes around the earth. Does that mean that's true?
For all intents and purposes for them, it was like I guess, you know, it's not true, but
Sure, of course they believe it's true.
yeah, I mean,
They believe it's true, but is it true?
right.
No, like I'm asking.
I mean, by that logic, like, we don't know. Maybe like there's something we don't know out there that actually none of this, right? We can't actually say for sure.
Interesting,
I
Nathan.
feel like some people tend to fall into the trap of like equating truth with fact and saying like something is true because it's factually holds from the evidence that we have. When there are things that are like true a priori that don't really fit into the like boxes of, oh, we have this observation about it that necessitates that it fulfills the statement.
Yeah, I think there's definitely quite a bit of a priori knowledge. But when we're dealing with statements that deal with the external world, right, where we don't know a priori whether this is green or not, we don't even know a priori whether it exists or not, how can we make truth judgments about this world, right? Was Yasha, you were going to say something? Okay, cool. Any other thoughts here? Oh yeah.
One, two, thing.
Huh?
The colors ever change?
What do you mean?
Like, have you ever like seen colors change?
Mm,
You know, because I realized that like when you stare at something, the receptors in your eyes like start.
yeah, get
narrowing, and
desensitized.
then
Yeah.
The color like changes a little bit.
I've had the thing where like if you stare at something long enough, it starts to disappear. Like if you're in a dark room, like has anyone else experienced that? Yeah, but I haven't seen colors change per se. Cool. Okay. Any other final thoughts here? Okay. So let's take a look at the classical Indian approach to epistemology or sources of knowledge. So I've basically laid out here the basic way they go about doing this. Basically, they say that there's Brahmanas, which are means of knowledge, right? So you can have like sort of a like your ear, for example, right? This might be like a Brahmana, right? Specifically, it's a type of perception. And then you have a prameya, right, which is an object. So, for example, like a bird crowing, or like a crow making its noise. And then you have a Brahma, which is actually a cognitive episode. That's a brain. And this cognitive episode is basically the co-occurrence of your Brahmana with the prameya. So they basically focus a lot on these episodes of knowledge, these cognitive episodes, and we judge the truth value of those episodes. We don't ask whether it is, we don't necessarily talk about some kind of like formal logical structure. Actually, we'll get to this in a couple slides. But then there's different sources of knowledge, right? There's different pramanas. We don't have to just do perception. We can also perform anumana or inference, which is like logical operation, right? If x is greater than y and y is greater than z, then x is greater than z. Right? So that's like inference. And then we have Shabda, testimony, right? So if we hear from like a reliable source that something is true, then we can assume it's true. And then we have a few other kind of other sources of truth. The last one here, Anupalabdhi, non-cognition, I actually realized recently has connections to the law of the excluded middle. Is anyone familiar with LEM? Law, yeah, Chris, do you want to explain that real quick?
So I think that's okay. Like, I mentioned this one. It's like a very foundational homologic. It's like if you believe that LEM is true, then it's like you have something. You can't have something that is and isn't.
Yeah, exactly, right? So LEM basically says that like either X or not X. So like if like either something is true or it's not true. If something is shown to be not true, then that implies it's true. And this is like basically like the proof by contradiction approach that you can take in a lot of systems of classical logic, and certain schools of Indian philosophy introduce this anupalabdhi non-cognition idea to sort of do something similar. I actually have not thought about this clear enough. It is sort of like a good kind of like final project for someone interested in like logic to look into the connections there. Yeah.
So is unapologetic the same thing as law of exclusion, or is it the opposite?
I literally thought about this like yesterday, like while I was reading about unapologetic to make these slides, that it seems sort of similar to LEM, like, but basically the idea of the source of knowledge is that if we're sitting in a room and we don't perceive a crow, like making noise, then that is a source of knowledge in and of itself, which is different from the presence, right? There's a difference between presence implying truth versus non-presence implying truth. So yeah, it's something to think about like deeper. It's a very cursory kind of thought that I'm presenting. Yeah, cool. Any other thoughts? Okay. Wait, what were you asking something now? Okay. Cool. Okay. Intrinsic versus extrinsic truth cognition. I don't want to go too deep into this. We mentioned that Indian philosophy takes this sort of psychological approach to truth, right? They care about the truth value of these truth episodes. We don't, in Western logic, we have these like very elaborate kind of X and Y implies Z under like the A union, right? Like we have these very elaborate kind of formal systems. And while these are definitely useful in their own way, the Indian philosophy cares a lot more about talking about these cognitive episodes, these episodic kind of apprehensions of truth, and the episode's truth value, which takes into account a lot of different factors that don't necessarily depend on a formal, that can't necessarily be represented in a formal logical representation. There is recent work in like modal logic and epistemic logic, which the dude in the philosophy / math guy works on. He gave a talk last semester in math club. He has like this long name. Do you remember his name? It's like Ford and. Wait. I totally have a PDF by this guy. Yeah. Oh, no, it's the other guy in that department, Adam Bjorndal. Yeah, so that guy focuses on these like modal logics. Modal logic is basically talking about truth value under certain modalities. So what different people might believe is true. And that in a way draws a lot of parallels to this Indian approach of looking at psychological episodes. So then another central kind of dividing line between these schools of philosophy in terms of their opinion on truth is Svata versus Parata. So Svata is basically like Svata Pramanya means that a cognitive episode is true in and of itself. So when we hear the crow, when we hear the crow and we go through the cognitive episode of then inferring that there's a crow, that cognitive episode itself we know to be true. Whereas, so that's Svata, which comes from this root sva, which means self. It's actually cognate with the word self. But then there's also parata. So that says that we need to have a second order cognition in order to be able to judge the truth value of any given cognition. So this cognition cannot be true in and of itself. Instead, we have to like apprehend the truth value with a separate cognition that then judges the truth value of it. And again, this has a lot of ties to modal logic. So if this is something you're interested in, then definitely look into those kind of epistemic modalities in recent, like modern, like contemporary logic. So you can see how the different schools divide up along these lines, right? So the Mimamsa, Vedanta, and Sankhya take a Svata approach, whereas the Buddhists take this Bharata approach. And the reason why they take these different approaches are grounded in their metaphysical views, right? So the Buddhists care a lot about these kind of, let's not go into the metaphysics, but like the idea is that the Buddhists are focused a lot on this like momentariness of every kind of perception. So they have to take this different approach to whether things are true or false. Okay, justification of knowledge. So ignore the stuff on the right. I want everyone to read through the paragraph on the left. I'll give you like 30 seconds. Raise your hand when you're done reading it and like thinking about it. So have you guys sort of thought over this a bit? So this guy, he sees this meat that's cooking on a fireplace, right? And the meat starts attracting these flies. He mistakes the cloud of flies for smoke. And then by seeing the smoke, he infers that there's a fire. And while it is true that there's a fire, it's false that there's any smoke there, right? He sort of took an incorrect logical route here, but he arrived at a true belief. So I'll ask a couple questions to you. Is his belief of the fire true? Is he, like, from his point of view, is it, or I won't say from his point of view, I'll say, is it true for him to say that there is a fire? Thoughts? Yes, sir.
I think we look at this purely objectively. He said there was a fire, but the fire has not been lit yet, right?
No, the fire has been lit. There's a fire.
Okay, if he said there's a fire and there's a fire, then he's correct.
It is true that there is a fire, but is his belief that the fire exists, is that true? That's what we're asking.
I think so. I would regard it as true solely because there is a fire. There is some truth in his thought that there is a fire, isn't there? If I believe 1 + 1 is 2, but I don't understand addition, 1 + 1 is still 2, right? And my belief that 1 + 1 is 2 is still true.
Interesting. Yeah, no, definitely. And that sort of talks, that's sort of similar to what's called the correspondence theory of truth that we'll talk about in the next slide. Yeah, Nathan?
I also think it's kind of makes sense because in this particular situation, you can almost work backwards, like the logical implications of both ways, because the flies are consequences of the meat, which like is the reason for the fire. So you can go backwards from flies to the
Yeah, but he doesn't know that they're flies. He thinks that it's smoke, right? So that's the key kind of issue here. So let me draw this out maybe to better illustrate it. So there's a fire. There's like meat cooking on the fire, right? There's no smoke yet. The fire is still very small, but there's a cloud of flies above this. So the guy sees the flies. He thinks that there's smoke. He thinks that it's smoke. And then this implies to him that there's a fire. But clearly there's a mistake, and while it is true that these correspond, there is a mistake, there's clearly a mistake being made somewhere, right? Does everyone agree that there's like a cognitive error in his thought process? Does someone think that like his thought process was perfectly fine? Okay, we'll get to that in like 5 slides. Thank you for saying that. Yes, yes.
Is it possible for belief to be untrue? Seeing that there was no fire, it was just flies outside his cognitive processes that there was a fire. Is it possible to justify to that person without actually taking them to the site of the fire that there was no fire? Like, is it possible for his belief based upon his own experiences and his own perceptions at all?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say yes, right? So if we take away this fire and we say there's a cloud of flies, he thinks it's smoke, but there isn't even a fire yet. The flies are just clouding over the meat. Then Sid, would you say that if there's no fire, would you say that he's still like his belief in the fire is still true?
No,
No, right?
because there's no fire.
There's no fire, right? So then the correspondence theory would break down. But like, I see what you mean from his point of view. Like of course, from his point of view, his belief is true, right? No, the meat is still there. The meat is just sitting out there. No, there's no fire yet. Yeah. But that's sort of a different scenario, right? Okay, so we've sort of established that it might be fair to say that his belief of the fire is true, right? He thinks that there's a fire. There is indeed a true fire. But then I'll ask, is his belief in the fire justified? Is he justified in believing that there is a fire? Yes, Milo.
This might be a false statement, but all the time I teach algebra, and a lot of the time I teach it to arrive at the correct answer through a mistake. And they are correct, right? But their method is not justified. Like their cognitive flaw. So
Yeah.
I'm taking true belief is this objectively true? And justified belief is the line of thought.
And when we say objectively true, there, just to be more specific, we're saying the belief corresponds with what exists in the world, right? Okay, cool. Yes.
I think like something like these kind of the idea of like reproducibility. So if we gave this man a soul of flies, he'd be like that's fire. If we gave minor students like algebra, they might not get it. There's that idea of reproducibility, which is like lacking. So I feel like when you can get something right multiple times, then you believe that's the time.
Yeah, very interesting. And there's sort of a link to like machine learning here as well, right? Where you have these machine learning models that might learn heuristics that are true in one setting, but then COVID comes along and it completely fucks over the way the data is structured. And those heuristics no longer hold true. And now they have to learn the actual underlying causal structure instead of just the high level kind of correlations. Yeah.
I was just thinking about like how similar this is to like arguments I've seen online. It's like that, like so like
Belief in what?
like belief in God. So like a Christian apologist might say that or like so someone arguing against a Christian apologist that like sure there might actually be a God out there and like we might all point out, you know, but like say he doesn't intervene at all, like there's like no evidence. So like all the Christians who believe in God, they would be coming to their belief in God like their belief in him wouldn't be justified. So like so it's like better to only come to beliefs that are justified than to like randomly guess and to get it right.
Yeah, no, that's a great parallel to draw. I think we're definitely going to be, the reason why we're covering epistemology first is because once we have our epistemology and our framework to look at knowledge firm, we can go and then use it to investigate like more complex phenomena, like God, for example. Are these questions different? So we answered the first one with yes and the second one with no. the Indian philosophers would actually say that this first belief is actually false. They'd argue that the belief in the fire is entirely false because this Brahmana is like an incorrect judgment. So the judgment of smoke from the perception of these flies is in of itself false. So you basically have this different idea in Indian philosophy where truth and justification are intertwined, where something cannot be true without it being justified. Yeah.
So if it's only based on the psychological episode, like what if perception of like the flies, like since say the guy does have it's like 5 like so everything's blurry. And like to him, like the flies and the smoke are like perceptively identical. So like and like let's say someone who would be verified by
Yes. Okay.
So like would that still be wrong? Like if they're like literally identical and he wasn't mistaken, it was like
So we will get to this as well in a few slides where we talk about where do you draw the line between conceptual perception and non-conceptual perception. But both Nathan and Chris, you brought up very important points. So we'll come back to that. So we talked about this a bit, right? Correspondence theory of truth. This is where we say that something is true if this fire corresponds with the way things are in the real world. Coherence is sort of more like a true statement coheres in a system of knowledge. So basically any given statement we consider true if when we look at all the other statements in our system of knowledge, the statement that we're looking at right now coheres with the rest, right? They all can hold true together. And then pragmatic is sort of the truth allows us to act in a meaningful way. So like what Milo said earlier, everyone sort of agrees on the same criteria of truth. Or like the same types of truth. So then we can act meaningfully and go engage with society based on that. So different schools of philosophy have different kind of theories of truth. Obviously the ones on the left are like Western terms, but in Indian philosophy, the Nyaya school prescribes to the correspondence theory called yathartha, and so they must take an extrinsic approach, right? If we say that truth is based on correspondence, right? That we only know that we can only prove this belief as true by comparing it to what there is in the real world. Then we need this higher level second order cognition in order to apprehend this true, right? Only we as the second order judges of this cognitive episode can judge this as true. Or maybe this guy 10 minutes later when he walks closer and he sees the fire, then only he can judge this as true. So by consequence of believing in correspondence theory, the Nyayikas must believe in extrinsic truth as well. And the specific way they define this in their very fancy kind of logical language is truth is the property of having that as its qualifier, which is limited by the property of having a qualificandum, which possesses the that. So take that as you will. Does anyone understand that? Yeah, no, I don't as well. I imagine there's like probably a nice, elegant kind of set theoretic way to describe it. And there have actually been a lot of attempts of pulling set theory out of traditional Nyaya approaches to logic. But yeah, yeah.
It's like what is the relationship between like discrete math and philosophy? I feel like there clearly is one, and I genuinely have no idea.
So they're so intertwined. So discrete math is a very kind of broad kind of term, but at the end of the 1800s, we have this dude called Frege, Gottlob Frege. Okay, I'm not going to draw a timeline, but at the, we have this guy called Gottlob Frege, which he develops this a propositional logic kind of approach, and he extends it to both math as well as language. Then you have Bertrand Russell, who writes this book called Principia Mathematica, where he formalizes all of mathematics in terms of set theory. And these people consider themselves philosophers. They're part of a specific tradition in Western philosophy called analytic philosophy that is generally considered to be started by Frege. And after Russell, you have discrete math. The reason why discrete math is a broad term, but specifically we're talking mainly about logic. Logic has a lot of tie-ins with both the math side and the language side. So something that we can show is true about logic will often also have implications for the rest of linguistics and formal semantics, as well as mathematics. So for example, when we, in the 1960s and 70s, have developments in lambda calculus, for example, lambda calculus, does anyone remember who developed lambda calculus? Haskell Curry, right? So something like that. But this guy develops lambda calculus, and then 10 years later, we have Richard Montague. He takes lambda calculus and shows that you can use it to describe the semantic properties of language. So you can, he basically shows that you can go from a syntactic structure and turn it into a formal semantic structure. And your formal semantic structure is defined by a lambda calculus expression. So every time we've seen advances in logic, we also see advances in language and semantics generally, because logical expressions are like the best way to go about representing these semantic properties. Right now in the philosophy department at CMU, you might go in and be like, why are these guys doing math? I thought that their philosophy department, literally all of them are doing math. We have like the formal mathematics, the Hoskinson Center for Formal Mathematics that Chris mentioned earlier. The reason why that is because they're descended from this analytic philosophy tradition. Yeah, so they started by looking at logic, and then they got more and more into like formal logic, really complex logic, kind of modal logic, intuitionistic logic, constructive logic, blah, blah. And now you have this thing called homotopy type theory, where they're basically building the new foundations, like a new approach to foundations of mathematics that is based on all these other approaches to math, namely like type theory and algebraic topology. And then they're combining it to say some very interesting things about systems of mathematics that don't have laws that don't have a law of excluded middle, which is what I was mentioning earlier. Yeah, Chris.
Like, doesn't type theory have to do with, like, computer science language?
Yeah, it is the same type theory. Should I talk about homotopy type? I can talk to you about homotopy type theory after. Anyone? Yeah, if you guys are interested. Yeah. Okay, cool. Okay, can we trust our perception? Do you guys trust your perception? Who trusts their perception? Okay, Milo, why do you trust your perception?
It's gotten this far, and I personally believe that whenever I am like in terms of like light and the way that I'm taking it, like sound or whatever, once I like see may or may not be like an accurate reflection of reality, right? But it is like what allows me to interact with reality, right? And clearly it does a good job of it. So I trust it like
definitely. So that's something really similar to the view of Donald Hoffman that we'll talk about in a bit. Does anyone say that they cannot trust their perception? Joshua? Okay. So then how do you like know I'm here, for example? Like
I don't.
damn. Chris, do you have any thoughts? Why do you not trust your perception?
Well, I've taken yeah, and they basically give a lot of good reasons to doubt. There's so many ways in which our sense of air, and even if we think that everything's like going smoothly, when we look at the objects in that delusion.
Yeah.
And like we like air number perceptions like literally every single day. It's very constant. Like, you always like think we're seeing someone that's like someone else. We like misread something. Our brain just like
Yeah, there's tons of perceptual errors. Like Cognizer talks about it all the time. Yeah.
Actual reason not just for perception is that I've read extensively about Beaujolais, which I
Oh, simulacra.
You know what
simulacra.
simulacra and simulation. You know what the map analogy is? Right?
No.
So basically, like all of Baudrillard's theory can be summarized. Imagine that there's a king who asks a map maker to make a map of his kingdom, right? And every time this map maker comes with a map of this king's kingdom, the king is like, no, make it bigger, make it bigger, make it bigger.
Oh, confusing the map for reality.
To the point where, the map covers the kingdom, and so to an outsider,
the map bigger.
yeah, like the king keeps asking the map maker to make the map
Because like it isn't realistic enough.
It's not realistic enough. To the point where the map is now the size of the kingdom. And so to an outsider, when they're looking in, that kingdom looks like the map, but nobody can know what the kingdom actually is unless they're in the kingdom. And there's also this like Disney Baudrillard theory, which is the idea that the hyper reality generated by the map is very much like fantasized, and it's like very much a romanticized version of what the kingdom actually is, which means that your perception actually doesn't mean anything because you're only looking at a map. You're not the kingdom.
Interesting. Okay, yeah. So this is all tied into like Donald Hoffman that we'll talk about in a bit. Milo.
Yeah, right. Like I hear what you guys are saying, but like addressing the idea like this is an illusion or something. Like if this is an illusion and this is all that I can perceive, then it is in effect my reality, and whatever is true is what I accept as true. Period. I don't see any need to see outside of whatever.
Beautiful, beautiful. This is a nice, this is a good opinion. No, and because Donald Hoffman actually, I think, will provide a nice unification to these ideas, in that he says that this quote isn't what I want to talk about, but Donald Hoffman, who is a cognitive scientist at UC Irvine, he has this idea that our perception is the actual reality might be nothing like perception. Our perception is sort of an interface to reality. But importantly, it's an interface that has evolved over evolution for billions of years, which makes it pragmatically very, very useful for interacting with the world. So while the world might not actually be anything like we perceive it to be, our perception is definitely a very useful tool for interacting with the world. So from a pragmatic point of view, that's all that matters, right? Because our perception has been so refined over billions of years of evolution to allow us to interact with the world. Therefore, from a pragmatic point of view, great. Our perception is true. So to sort of also formalize this discussion, though, we can talk about realism versus idealism. This is like epistemic realism. Basically means that we perceive the world exactly as it is. If I perceive this marker here, I feel it on my hand, I see it. That means that there is a marker in the real world that corresponds to this marker that I'm feeling. Idealism, on the other hand, says that perceptions are mental constructs. So there might there's like no marker in my hand. Maybe my hand doesn't even exist. My brain is just sort of constructing this internal representation. There might be a world out there. There might not be a world out there. All I know is that what my perceptions are mental constructs. And this entire kind of debate goes back definitely to Descartes, definitely way longer. But Descartes sort of also has this famous kind of quote, right? I think, therefore I am. All that I can perceive is my own cognitive process. Therefore, I know that at least that exists. And everything else sort of has to be built from there. Milo, are you gonna say something?
Just a question of curiosity.
What do I think? I think this is a spectrum, right? So it's like sort of a cop-out. But I think Donald Hoffman's point of view holds a lot of value. Yeah, I think this Darwinistic kind of account of our perception evolving to suit our needs is probably pretty accurate. And it turns out that often when you ask a system to do something pragmatic, very often it will uncover the underlying structure of what you're training it on, right? So when you train a machine learning model to learn some data set, right? So we have like a linear data set here, right? If we train a machine learning model to basically learn this pattern, very often, if our machine learning model is structured correctly, it'll literally learn the exact line that matches it. First of all, this is because like our machine learning model actually has the computational ability to model this simple data set. So that obviously has to be true. It has to have the ability to do so. It has to have the expressivity to be able to capture this. But at the same time, this is the underlying distribution, right? Like the nature of the reality here is in fact this straight correlation. So the model of the world that we're training, this machine learning model, this solid line, even though we're only training it on this kind of pragmatic sample data, right? From a very pragmatic point of view, we're just telling it match the points and approximate any input as effectively as possible. Despite that being the training objective, it converges upon the actual underlying distribution of the data. So I think pragmatic accounts, I think people give less value to pragmatic accounts of perception than they should be. Pragmatic accounts of perception might account for reality better than we often think them to be. And this interesting opinion from Advaita is that there's no difference between the object of perception and the cognizer itself. So for example, when this person perceives the smoke, their consciousness literally becomes the smoke, or something like crazy like that. Huh?
When people get like, they think they get really injured, like this guy died because he got nail went through his foot when he just like went through his toes. There's this case in Britain, like it's like documented where this guy like stepped on like an industrial nail, and he went into shock and died because he was in the boot and he just went through his shoe, like between his toes.
Okay.
But like, so to that guy, like
Oh.
he thought that he was seriously injured.
Like
Not even
psychos.
seriously injured, but yeah. And then this other guy, like the surgeon in Britain, it's always freaking Britain. I don't know what's up with it. But like this surgeon, you know how they have to like work really fast because they didn't have good anesthesia. The guy who like could saw someone's leg in 3 minutes and like once like killed 3 people.
Oh my God.
During operation. Well, manslaughter, but so like the wound got infected, and then he cut off his assistant's finger, and then he just like grazed this other person. But they thought that they were like also fatally injured, and they had like a heart attack.
Oh
They
my.
thought they were injured badly, but they were just like
That's kind of crazy. Yeah, no, I think those kind of psychosomatic kind of illnesses are definitely like this. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a case to be made that our perceptions in a way project, like we project our internal model of the world onto the world rather than just perceiving it. So that's actually what we're going to talk about next, right? Is perception conceptual? What do I mean when I say conceptual? I mean linguistic, symbolic, right? When we perceive something, I guess what I'm asking is, when I perceive this marker, when I perceive this thing right here, is there a layer to my perception where I am just perceiving the raw elemental reality? Or is it the fact that as soon as I perceive this, I'm perceiving its markerness, I'm perceiving all of its linguistic and symbolic attributes? Yes, Milo.
I'm pretty sure I understand what you're asking, but like the light, like the raw light, hits your eyes first, and then you're getting the science. So like, I mean, don't you get whatever raw elemental stuff you can actually physically pick up, and then it is brought into whatever linguistic stuff, right?
Well, they certainly hit the eye, but things start getting more messy once it hits the brain, right? I think the question that's really being posed is the raw sensory data available to our conscious experience? Or is our conscious experience limited to only experiencing the world through this lens of conceptuality?
Yeah, I mean, sure, let's say I see an object, right? I can still perceive the object without knowing. Like, without having any conscious knowledge of what an object is. Like, if you show me like an abstract, like, non-existent object, well, yeah, like I know what that is, right? But, like, there's like images and things that are like generated that like, don't actually exist.
Yeah.
You see that post on Instagram?
Yeah,
I don't
something
know.
like
Can't make anything.
Yeah,
like that, right? Like I can still perceive those images, right?
Yeah, there's a
It's
great
like
example.
not
Yeah, yeah.
having- I can perceive what this is without having any conceptual.
This, you can't name anything in this picture. It's crazy. Like, this is like the one viral, right? It was like,
wow.
name one thing in this picture.
Yeah.
You have, you have no idea. It's just Google name one thing in this picture. Just behind. So weird.
Hey, no one look at no one look at the TV right now. Okay, what is this? I know everyone looked at the TV, but like, can you like not? All right, see you, John. Can you not see the cow? Like, can you see how if you looked at this, you would not see the cow, you would just see like blobs? Yeah, so like almost like literally everyone when they look at this the first time, they don't see anything, they just see blobs. And then when you say cow to them, they suddenly start seeing the cow. So I think there's a case to be made for purely perceptual or purely purely sensory data, non-conceptual data being available to consciousness. So that's actually the opinion taken by the Buddhists, that all perception is actually non-conceptual, nirvikalpaka. But then certain other schools like the Jains and the Navya Nyaya, the new Nyaya school, which was established around 1200 AD, they say that all perception is conceptual. There is no conscious perception. There's no perception available to consciousness that doesn't have concepts built in. And then most of the schools, the Nyaya, Mimamsa, and Vedanta, they say that it varies by perception episode. So certain perceptual episodes will have conceptual content, other perceptual episodes won't. And I think that tends to be the case in reality, right? So like when I perceive this marker, there's like going to be a lot of conceptual content here. I know how to use it. I immediately know what it says, what like I can take this cap off. I know all these conceptual things about it. Whereas when I saw that image of the cow, that wasn't true, right? Like I just saw this non-conceptual blob of ink. Yes.
I feel like when you look at the calculus, you're still seeing something. You're seeing like, oh, this is some kind of, you have some kind of malfunction, and you like immediately see that. But then when someone mentions a cow, it somehow like evolves things.
Yeah.
I'm skeptical still of the idea of perceptual.
Like raw perception. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, you could always say that you perceive the blackness and you perceive the whiteness, and that's definitely like conceptual information, right? You're not just perceiving raw sensory data completely removed from the concepts of color. You're still perceiving color. You're still perceiving shape. So in a way, it is conceptual. Maybe there's degrees of conceptuality, right? Like certain things, when I perceive them, they're very highly conceptual, right? Like writing, for example. When I perceive written word, it's almost entirely conceptual. Whereas when I perceive like the blob of ink, there's some conceptual assertions I can make about it. I could say it's black, it's like shaped like a blob, but for the most part, it's just raw perception. So a few Indian opinions on this. Gangesha of the Navya Nyaya school says that non-conceptual information is non-verbalizable, thus it's entirely epistemically irrelevant. So basically what he's saying is that even though I might be able to perceive I might be able to perceive the marker, like if I do all this meditation and everything like the Buddhists say, I might be able to perceive the marker without imposing any conceptual data onto it, conceptual knowledge onto it. He says that even though I might be able to perceive those raw sensory data, it's irrelevant to talk about them because I cannot linguistically discuss their nature. I cannot create conceptual kind of frameworks to deal with them. Therefore, it's irrelevant to talk about their truth value or whether they actually exist. Dharmakirti, a Buddhist, takes the entire opposite approach. He says that errors in cognition arise only after concepts are imposed on raw perception. So jumping back to this example, right? This dude's eyes, right? When he sees this, his raw perception is entirely, it includes all the data necessary to construct the smoke. And this is, I know Chris, we will come back to Chris' earlier point. His visual data, when it hits his retina, definitely contains all the data necessary to articulate the fact that there's smoke here. Sorry, only flies here. But in his brain, he then consults with all his conceptual information, right? He says, what does smoke look like? Oh, it's like a blob and it like moves around, et cetera, et cetera. And then he projects that conceptual information onto the raw perception. And that's where the error is made. So the Buddhists say that true perception, perception as a source of knowledge, is entirely void of conceptual information. These concepts that we impose on our raw perception are where the errors actually come from. And an approach and an idea from recent cognitive psychology work is that conceptual representations in the brain are multimodal. So what that means is that there's this area in the brain called the inferior temporal gyrus. So like I haven't drawn this part on most of the brains, but like it turns out it's really important. I think it's like this kind of region. This region of the brain has these semantic representations almost, where we have certain types of information clustering together. So we have like rabbits over here and like cows over here. And it turns out that when we say the word cow, this area lights up. When we show people pictures of cows, the same area lights up. So this suggests that these conceptual representations in the brain are in fact multimodal. They're conceptual. The raw perceptions are aligned at this stage in the brain alongside linguistic information. And for reference, when the optical fibers sort of like go back here to the back to what's called the ocular cortex, and then we have this thing called the ventral stream. So while you could argue that maybe in the ocular cortex there's nothing going on in terms of conceptual representations, it is definitely true that by at least this point our brain starts imposing these conceptual delineators on the real world. Cool. Yeah.
I just want to like kind of add a little bit. I took a class last semester. It's like it happened surprisingly early, like college. Now things like start to become actual. Like what he's talking about with obvious lobe, it goes into the what's it called?
Inferior temporal gyrus.
Temporal cortex. Like that's still miles away from like the frontal lobe, parallel region.
Yeah. So you're saying that like a lot of our complex reasoning happens in this region, and there are pathways that might take our conceptual information here to then perform logical operations on them. But even at this relatively early stage, we have these conceptual representations that combine the sensory data with conceptual linguistic. Okay, all right, just one more slide. Perceptual errors. Okay, everyone read this one on the left now. I'll read it out loud as well. It's much shorter. In the dusk, a man sees something that he takes to be a dangerous snake. Looking closer, he realizes that what he took to be a snake is a rope, and his fear dissipates. Is the snake real? That's the question. Thoughts? He saw a rope. He thought it was a snake. Then he got closer, he realized it was actually a rope. Is the snake real? Did the snake ever exist? Was the snake real at some point?
No.
No? Why?
What is the question?
The snake isn't real?
It was never real, right? It's not real. No. No, it wasn't even real to him. It was just never real.
It was never real. Okay, interesting. So the response I'd give you is it possible for things that are unreal to appear in the real world? So, for example, is it possible for a unicorn to appear in the real world?
You do that? I don't think so.
No, right?
No.
It's impossible for things that are unreal to exist in the real world. So what does that imply? If it's impossible for unreal things to exist, that means it's only possible for things that are real to exist in the real world, right? So, or not, the specific word he uses is not exist, but rather appear. So the unicorn never appears in the real world because it doesn't exist. Because it doesn't exist, that's true. But the snake did appear in the real world.
But it didn't.
No, the snake appeared.
You saw a snake.
He saw a snake. The snake appeared in the real world.
But it didn't.
No, the snake appeared. He saw a snake. Well, I'm not saying that we're not even talking about existence.
All we know right now is that he saw
You saw a snake.
He saw a snake.
But he did it. He saw a rope.
No, he saw a snake.
Haven't you ever seen like a shadow or something and you thought it was a person?
Oh.
Or you see,
Okay, yeah.
you know, like
I got
that.
it. Sorry, I thought you guys. were
So
saying-
like
I was so confused.
a snake appeared to him in the real world. And if we take it to be true that only things that are real can appear, then it means that the snake has to be real. Right? Like I know you're not satisfied with that.
Yeah, because there's no snake.
That's what it seems like. Like they're from our perspective, there was never a snake in the real world. But from what we can tell based on the real world evidence, that unicorns never show up, all those like fantastical, crazy creatures never show up in the world. But the snake did appear in the world. So that suggests to us that it's real. Yeah, Nathan.
I want to say that he saw snakeness.
He saw snakeness.
I feel like that's more satisfactory than to say. Because he didn't, like, it turned out not to be a snake, but he did see features of a snake.
Hmm.
You know?
Yeah, so in Indian philosophy, for those who aren't familiar, there's this idea of like, there's this suffix stva, which is basically the same as ness. And it talks about, like it basically means the quality of something. So I don't think it's fair to say that he saw snakeness. I think it would be fair to say he cognitively, like snakeness appeared to him cognitively. So again, I guess then the question comes back to this kind of perception thing, right? Over here, maybe it was just a rope, right? But once he imposed conceptual content onto the rope, then it turned into a snake. Right. That is my snake.
To him though, right?
What do you mean to him?
Like for an external all-seeing person, there was never a snake.
There's no external all-seeing person.
But if we make there be one, like objectively, if you were standing far away and you could see both the rope and the snake with perfect, sorry, the rope and the thing and the person with perfect vision, there was never a snake, right?
To a person who sees the rope, there is no snake. Yes. The snake seems to have existed though, to this theory. If you guys are specifically interested in this, they actually go for quite long discussing this specific. Yeah, I don't want to go into it right now, but there's very long arguments specifically on this topic. One interesting point of view is that one group draws like a distinction between beings that literally cannot exist, like unicorns and rabbits with horns, like the specific things, or the son of a barren woman. The son of a barren woman can like literally not exist by definition. So basically they say that like these unreal things, which we know for a fact cannot exist in the world, do not show up in the real world. But there's another category of things that do exist in the real world, like snakes. Snakes up here, right? Snakes are real, right? Like you've seen a snake before.
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, he says that since there's a category of things that never appear in the world, we've never perceived a son of a barren woman. We've never perceived a unicorn. But that means that those like that category of things is impossible to be real. But there is this other category of things, of real things that sometimes appear in the world, but do not stay for very long. So certain schools of philosophy have like very interesting kind of points of view that I think the Western philosopher would completely disagree with. Another school says that when the snake is viewed, the person has cognitive, like they have the prameya, right? Like the object of cognition is actually a snake that's like far away. It's just like a completely different snake. There's no snake over here. The snake over here was never real, but there was a snake like somewhere else And the dude just like magically, not magically, but like by some crazy phenomenon called like sun negosha pramana. By this phenomenon, this guy perceives this like other snake. Yeah.
Is this all to say that?
Huh?
Is this all to say that?
Bigfoot is real. No, I think they'd say that this is evidence that Bigfoot is definitely not real.
How do you know what exists and what doesn't exist?
Oh, that's a good. So yeah, actually, I guess there's nothing inherently impossible about Bigfoot, right? Yeah.
Like, isn't this entire discussion tied to the premise that some things objectively exist and some things objectively don't? Like you said, unicorns don't exist, but snakes do. But like, you don't even know if the premise is true, and therefore the argument that follows can't be true.
So unicorn is a bad example. The specific example they use is the son of a barren woman. So this is stuff that Kant talked about. So like there are things that are linguistically like contradictions, right? So the son of a barren woman, or the horn of a rabbit. The horn of a rabbit literally cannot exist because rabbits do not have horns. Like they're defined by not having horns, right? Or the king of France. The king of France doesn't exist, right? France is like a parliamentary democracy or whatever. So these non-referring expressions refer to entities that never appear in the real world. So based on their this is a priori knowledge actually. We have a priori knowledge that a bachelor's wife doesn't exist, right? Yeah.
So just to clarify, a priori means that like it's by definition.
Yeah, exactly, by definition, right? So like
Yeah,
one
I see
equals
that.
one, like a priori, like within like a system, with like most systems of mathematics, like we have this like equivalence of self. Yeah. Okay, cool. So yeah, perceptual errors. There's a lot of work on this. It's called Kyativada. Okay, so then last slide over here. Is there a basis for pramanas themselves? Do you guys think that we can? Do you guys think that we can find a basis for those like 6 sources of knowledge that we listed, or are we just sort of like pulling things out of our ass? Like are these just like arbitrary like viewpoints on what we can trust for sources of knowledge, or can we back these sources of knowledge up with something else? Nathan.
I don't know if this analogy will get for anything else, but I kind of say that the Brahmanas are like providing knowledge because they fit certain axioms, like a vector space. Like if you have 2 like observations and it's like something that operate on them, like an operation that also fits within Brahmana. But that's not really a good analogy because one of the Brahmanas is inference. That's kind of the way I'm thinking about it.
Can you explain it another way?
Like if there's self-consistent.
Okay, okay. So coherence, right? So like this is sort of a coherence theory of truth that so you're saying that the knowledge we gain from one pramana aligns with the knowledge that we gain from the other pramanas. So together they cohere as like a set of sources of knowledge. Therefore, they like by their coherence we can treat them as true. Okay, cool. Yeah, no, that's an interesting perspective. I don't think I've come across that previously. Yeah, any other thoughts on a basis for pramanas? Because some skeptic schools of philosophy completely went in on this. They were like, no, there's no basis for pramanas, right? So the Buddhists, for example, will say things like any attempt to justify a pramana in and of itself must depend on another pramana. If you try to justify like the truth value of perception itself, then you must rely on like some form of perception, right? Otherwise, how can you know that perception is true? So we're sort of forced to take this position that either the pramanas are axiomatic and we have no justification for them, or we fall into the trap of saying that there's like a infinite kind of infinite line of ad infinitum, right? So we have like a perception of like a perception of like a perception of like a perception, and like this goes into infinity. and we can never, there's never a base case for us to say that, there's never a base case that proves all of these is true. We're just forced into going into infinity and never actually proving our axioms as true sources of knowledge. Cool. Any other thoughts or questions here? Is there another slide? I don't think so. Oh yeah, discussion. I mean, it's already 8:20. What do you guys want to do? I think so. Like, what do you guys think about this? Like, I guess nowadays I'm trying to more integrate the discussion with the slides themselves. I feel like that's sort of more conducive to actually interacting with the content, right? Whereas if we have a discussion at the end, then like I could theoretically lecture and get through all the slides in like 20, 25 minutes, and then we could just discuss at the end. But I feel like that's not as conducive to actually interacting with the content. So I mean, I don't know. What do you guys think? Like, should we continue to have like a discussion thing at the end, or should I continue to like put these slides in between and like have questions where we go and like have dialogue within the slides?
I think we're already like that.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah. All right. Okay, awesome. All right. So then we can stick with this format. So I'll still put like a discussion slide at the end in the future with some ideas in case we have time in the future, but I guess we will mostly stick to having these internal discussions. Cool. Okay, awesome. Thank you guys.